example of that expansionary fiscal policy, you have three different choices. You could say the government could increase its spending on whatever. It could increase government transfers, like it could extend the time period that unemployed people could collect benefits, let's say, or it could cut taxes. Those are all three policy prescriptions that you could put as an example in your FRQ that would qualify you to get the point, okay? All right, so we've got this recessionary gap, then we get an expansionary policy that pushes us back to potential output, albeit at a higher price level, okay? Meaning that there's gonna be some inflation. What kind of inflation is this? Demand pull or cost push? Review from Monday. Gwenny?
How would it be demand?
Yes! If the inflation increase is the result of aggregate demand moving to the right, it's demand pull. The hint is in the name. Demand has increased, so it's demand pull. Okay. All right, let's look at contractionary fiscal policy. These policies are trying to reduce inflation, typically, okay? So contractionary fiscal policies can take one of three forms: reducing government purchases, a reduction in government transfers, cutting benefits, for example, or increasing taxes. Very, very rarely in the last century have we seen contractionary fiscal policy. Guess why? Very unpopular with the voters at home. Right? Nobody wants to give up advantages that they've had for a period of time. So contractionary policies are much less frequent a policy tool when we're in an inflationary gap, because they're not very politically popular. And all of those Congress people, senators, and people want to get reelected, so they don't vote for them very often. Okay? Especially not increases in taxes. All right, so we've got this inflationary gap between Y sub 1 and Y sub P. The government does one of these three things. Again, any of these could be one of your examples if you were asked to explain or provide an example of how you would bring this economy back to potential output. Okay? And we restore long-run equilibrium by any of those contractionary policies. Okay. Should policymakers always act to offset declines in aggregate demand? Not necessarily. There are real costs in the long run for using fiscal policy. It can get really expensive really quickly, and we'll later on at a future moment talk about the long run costs of fiscal policy to manipulate aggregate demand, okay? And we'll look at that at a later time. Okay? So most economists would probably come down on the side of like, let's be really cautious with government spending, transfer payments, and tax policy unless there is a major negative shock to aggregate demand. Okay? A major negative shock. Like what happened in the Great Recession of 2007 and 2008. Should policymakers always act to offset positive shocks to aggregate demand? Okay. Again, it's controversial. First of all, the gains from an inflationary gap, they got to be paid back later, and that will come later with changes to wages and prices. But policymakers today usually try to offset both positive and negative demand shocks, and one of the reasons has to do with a change that came in 2012, where we were trying to maintain a targeted inflation rate of 2%. That's been since 2012. We'll get into that later when we talk about monetary policy, so don't worry about that so much. Okay. I said before, supply shocks are a lot more complicated, a lot more. First of all, if there's a negative supply shock, two things are happening simultaneously. If there is a decrease in short run aggregate supply, output is decreasing and prices are already rising. So that's stagflation. We talked about that on Monday, okay? If we use fiscal policies to try to stimulate aggregate demand, yes, we'll increase output, but we'll also increase inflation. However, if we address the inflation part of this, yes, we'll decrease inflation, but we'll probably add to that negative real GDP growth, okay? And that results in even more unemployment. So negative supply shocks are very, very tricky to manage. Nobody tries to manage a positive supply shock. That's good for everybody. Higher output, lower prices, nobody's gonna complain about that, okay? Or at least, well, there's probably some economist somewhere is gonna complain about it, but that's because they always have bad news, okay? All right, let's just revisit the multipliers, okay? When we are trying to figure out the impact of government spending or tax policy changes on the macro economy, we've got a spending multiplier that is much more powerful than the taxation multiplier, okay? So the government will have a stronger impact in changing aggregate demand if they change their expenditures versus taxes. And so a lot of it just depends on what's the goal? What's the government trying to do? How much aggregate demand are they trying to increase or decrease? Does that make sense? Okay. So let's say that there's a recessionary gap of $200 billion. The marginal propensity to consume is 0.8. So to try to figure out how much the government should spend to increase output by $200 billion, we're going to be using a little bit of Algebra 1. The change in government spending is our variable. Multiply times 1 over the marginal propensity to consume equals 200 billion. I want you to do this real quick. Solve for X. I don't see everybody trying to solve for X right now. You can get your phones out if you need your calculator. Does anyone have an answer? Safa, what do you got? So the spending multiplier is 5. The answer is 40 billion. Do you guys see where you made your math mistake? Okay.
Algebra 1 got it.
You're gonna have to do this many times. Okay, it's fine. Let's make all our mistakes now, not on the test or on the exam in May. Okay?
I don't know.
So we're trying to figure out what times 5 gives us $200 billion. Yes?
Where did the 5 come from?
That's the spending multiplier. If one over the marginal propensity to consume is the multiplier. So you just have to do the math. 1 divided by 0.8 is equal to 5.
It's 1.25.
Is it 8 over? Wait, I think it's no. Wait, that makes sense. 80% of 200. 160? That's what I got. I got 160.
Is the book wrong? Is the book wrong? Let me just see.
I hope so. That doesn't
I was gonna say.
Thomas Average.
You are correct. It is 1.25.
Hey.
So what
That's
times?
number 1.
So 200 billion.
Yeah.
Divide. Wait.
So it'd be 160.
Yeah.
Oh, it is 160.
Look at that. You guys did it right. It's the book that's
I
wrong.
never doubted it.
Yeah.
I think it's 1 over 0.2 is equal to 5, right?
Yeah,
That makes
that's
sense.
right. But
Yeah.
the MPC is
40 million to make up, or are they paying 160 million to make up?
I think
This-
it's 100.
Like,
Oh wait, did
I
they
see that the
multiply?
gas is 40 million, but
Yeah,
like,
because if they multiply 200 and 140.
like I see where the numbers.
I thought that the answer was the margin. If the marginal, I thought that the multiplier was 1 over 1 minus the marginal propensity to consume.
Oh,
That's what it is.
I don't know. I'm not much of a math brain.
That is not right.
Neither am
Hold on.
Would you kill?
What?
Would you like have something?
I am in calc.
Give me a second, you guys. I think that the book is.
I have a B
that's the
minus.
tax. I thought that was the.
And I
Wait,
had a
calc
C
what?
last semester.
Wait,
Calc
yeah, it
minus.
says expenditure
I'm not
multiplier.
even in AP.
Oh,
One minus.
Is it
Yeah.
Wait, so who's wrong?
somebody?
Somebody.
It ain't me.
Somebody.
Because I've not
Whoever made that PowerPoint.
It's one over 1 minus the marginal propensity to consume. Okay, guys, let's go back to this. This is wrong. It is 1 minus the marginal propensity to consume.
It's not divided.
What's that?
Yeah, 1 over. Okay.
Huh?
Like in the denominator.
But we just write it.
Oh wait, no.
Can you write it on the board?
Yeah,
Yeah.
hold on a second.
1 over 1
1 over
minus
MPC.
MPC.
Yeah, I think that's it.
I'm double checking because I'm like, wait a second.
Guys, why can we not do basic algebra?
Pause and read.
Yeah, I'm right. It's 1 over 1 minus the marginal propensity to consume.
Okay.
This is a major problem in our textbook, you guys. This is not correct. This formula is wrong.
Oh.
I know. The
Someone needs to
spending
get fired.
multiplier is 1 minus the marginal propensity to consume. So this is correct.
Oh, so
This.
oh.
40 billion. Because the spending multiplier should be 5, and that should be 1 divided by 0.2. Right?
To be fair, we did correct with what we were talking
We did
With
the
what-
math
what they
correct.
had on the
Yeah,
board.
you
Not
guys-
bad at math, guys.
I'm not mad at you and your abilities to do math. What I'm mad at right now is the publisher of our textbook who put this out without checking it.
Yes.
Yeah.
That being said, if expansionary policy is used, like how much are we going to have to cut taxes by? It's 0.8 divided by 0.2, and it's a negative here because it's a decrease in taxes, right? In order to expand aggregate demand. The change would have to be a cut of taxes of $50 billion. So they can cut taxes by 50 billion, or they can increase spending by 40.
You would repeat, sorry, why it's negative?
Because expansionary fiscal policy that would be used to address a recessionary gap is a decrease in taxes. Okay, so we're going to cut taxes by a certain amount, not increase them. Does that make sense? All right. So a taxation multiplier is always 1 less than the expenditure multiplier. And you guys have already seen that. Let's look at, there's an inflationary gap of 100 billion. The marginal propensity to consume is 0.8. How much should the government decrease spending by? It should be 1.25, the opposite, right? Okay.
Wait a minute. So this is the same one. Why is this 5 for 0.2, but the other one was also 5 for 0.8?
Wait a second, hold on. It is the same, it's 5, it's just that it's negative, sorry. Wait.
the last.
This is
Oh,
wrong.
it's only 100 billion. That one was 200 billion, sorry. All right, so this one's actually correct.
I'm
It's got
confused.
1 minus the marginal propensity to consume is 1 over 0.2, right? So they have to change government spending by negative $100 billion to get, or by negative 20 billion to get to, back to potential output, which is less by $100 billion. The difference between the inflationary gap and potential output is $100 billion, okay? So we want to decrease output by $100 billion. We would decrease government spending by $20 billion. They did it correctly this time. All right. And then this just does it with tax policy. The change in taxes would have to be an increase in taxes of 25 billion. All right. I want you guys to do one on your own before you get your stretch break and we do automatic stabilizers. And if we have to work automatic stabilizers into our class tomorrow, we will do so. So work this problem, please, before we move on, because I feel like there was too much confusion.
I'm gonna stop this. Hi, Kendall.